When I walked into my husband's office unannounced that Tuesday morning, I never expected to find him whispering sweet nothings into his phone while staring at a framed photo of his secretary. "She makes me feel alive again, like I'm 25 and invincible," he said, his voice tender in a way I hadn't heard in years. The same voice that used to make my heart flutter during our college days, now breaking it into 1,000 pieces as he spoke about another woman. I stood frozen behind his office door, clutching the surprise lunch I'd made him, watching my husband of 15 years pour his heart out to someone who wasn't me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Victoria Sterling, and until that moment I thought I knew exactly who I was. A devoted wife to Marcus Sterling, successful architect and founder of Sterling Design Group, a loving mother to our twin daughters, Sophia and Grace, both 14 and the lights of my life. A respected pediatric nurse at Metropolitan Children's Hospital, where I'd built a career helping families through their darkest moments. I was the woman who had everything figured out, the one my friends envied for having the perfect marriage, the stable family, the beautiful suburban home with the white picket fence. But standing there in that doorway, listening to my husband describe how his 26-year-old secretary Jasmine Chen made him feel more alive than his wife ever could, I realized how naive I'd been. Marcus was leaning back in his leather chair, the one I'd bought him for his 40th birthday last year, spinning slowly as he spoke into his phone, with the kind of intimacy that should have been reserved for me. His salt and pepper hair caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through his corner office windows, and for a moment, he looked like the man I'd fallen in love with in college. Handsome, confident, successful, but the words coming out of his mouth belonged to a stranger. "Elena, you have to understand," he continued, and my blood ran cold as I realized he wasn't talking to Jasmine at all, but to someone else entirely. "Jasmine isn't just some fling. She gets me." Victoria has become so focused on the girls and her career that she's forgotten how to be a wife. When I'm with Jasmine, I remember what it feels like to be desired, to be the center of someone's universe again. Elena, the name hit me like a physical blow. Elena Rodriguez was Marcus's business partner, the woman who'd helped him build Sterling Design Group from the ground up 8 years ago. She was also someone I'd considered a friend, someone who'd been to our dinner parties, who'd held my babies when they were small, who'd comforted me when my mother died 3 years ago. Now she was apparently serving as my husband's confidant, while he planned to destroy our family. I stepped back quietly, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure Marcus would hear it through the phone, but he was too absorbed in his conversation to notice anything else. "The problem is Victoria's not going to just step aside gracefully," he continued. "She's going to want half of everything, and with the girls still being minors, she'll probably get it. I need to be smart about this." Elena's voice came through the speaker, tinny but clear enough for me to catch her words. "What are you thinking, Marcus? You can't just hide assets. That's illegal." Marcus laughed, a sound that used to make me smile, but now made my stomach turn. "I'm not talking about hiding assets, Elena. I'm talking about restructuring, moving things around legally before I file for divorce. Jasmine's been helping me understand some creative accounting methods. Turns out her business degree is more useful than I thought." My legs felt weak. They weren't just having an affair. They were plotting to steal from me, to leave me with nothing while they rode off into the sunset together. I thought about our house, the one we'd bought when the girls were 5, the one where we'd created so many memories. I thought about the college funds we'd been building for Sophia and Grace, the retirement savings we'd worked so hard to accumulate. Was all of that just going to disappear, because Marcus had decided his secretary made him feel young again? I backed away from the office door and made my way to the elevator, my mind reeling. The lunch I'd prepared sat heavy in my hands, suddenly feeling like evidence of my own foolishness. I'd taken time off from my shift at the hospital to surprise him, to do something nice for the man I thought loved me. Instead, I'd discovered that my entire life was built on lies. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt endless. I kept replaying Marcus's words, trying to make sense of how I'd missed the signs. When had he stopped loving me? When had Jasmine Chen become more than just the efficient young woman who scheduled his appointments and organized his files? And Elena, how long had she been encouraging him, helping him plan my destruction? I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Thanks for thinking of me with lunch, babe, but I'm swamped today. Rain check." The casual lie, the easy deception, made me feel sick. How many other rain checks had been cover stories for time spent with Jasmine? That evening, I watched Marcus across our dinner table as he chatted with Sophia and Grace about their day at school. He looked so normal, so much like the loving father and husband he'd always been. Grace was telling him about her science project, and he was giving her his full attention, asking thoughtful questions and offering encouragement. Sophia was complaining about her algebra teacher, and Marcus was patiently helping her work through a particularly difficult problem. This was the man I'd loved for 17 years, since we were college sophomores, and he was struggling through his architecture program while I was buried in pre-med courses. We'd supported each other through everything: his father's death during our senior year, my mother's battle with cancer, the difficult years when we were trying to conceive, the joy when we found out we were having twins. We'd built a life together, brick by brick, decision by decision. How could he throw all of that away for a woman barely older than our daughters? After dinner, while Marcus retreated to his home office to catch up on some work, I helped the girls with their homework and tried to process what I'd learned. Sophia noticed something was wrong immediately. She'd always been perceptive, able to read people's emotions with an accuracy that sometimes surprised me. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, looking up from her history textbook. "You seem sad." I forced a smile. "Just tired, sweetheart. Long day at the hospital." Grace glanced up from her biology assignment. "Is someone sick? Like someone you know?" The innocence of the question almost broke me. Someone was sick, all right. Our family was sick, infected with lies and betrayal, and I was the only one who knew how bad the diagnosis really was. But I couldn't tell my daughters that. Not yet, not until I figured out how to protect them from the fallout that was coming. "No, honey, nothing like that, just the usual hospital stress." But as I tucked them into bed that night, I made them a silent promise. Whatever Marcus and Jasmine and Elena were planning, whatever legal or financial tricks they thought they could pull, I wouldn't let my daughters suffer for their father's selfishness. I would find a way to protect them, to protect our future, even if it meant going to war with the man I'd once trusted with my life. Marcus came to bed around midnight, sliding under the covers beside me like nothing had changed. He smelled faintly of perfume, something floral and young that definitely wasn't mine. When he tried to kiss me goodnight, I turned my face away and pretended to be asleep. He didn't seem particularly bothered by the rejection. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead of going to the hospital, I drove to the downtown office of Patricia Hawkins, a divorce attorney whose reputation was legendary among the nurses at work. Patricia was known for her ruthless efficiency and her ability to protect women from husbands who thought they could manipulate the system. Patricia's office was nothing like Marcus's sleek architectural firm. It was warm and comfortable, with family photos and children's artwork on the walls that spoke of a woman who understood what was really at stake in these battles. Patricia herself was in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through all the polite pretenses people usually hid behind. "Tell me what's happening, Victoria," she said after I'd introduced myself and explained why I was there. I told her everything, about finding Marcus on the phone with Elena, about their plans to restructure assets before filing for divorce, about Jasmine and her supposed business expertise. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad and occasionally nodding in ways that suggested she'd heard similar stories before. "How much do you know about your family's finances?" she asked. When I finished, I thought I knew everything. "We've always been open about money, joint accounts, joint investments, joint everything. Marcus handles most of the day-to-day business finances because of his company, but I review all our personal statements every month." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "Victoria, I need you to understand something. If your husband is planning to restructure assets with his business partner's help, there are probably things happening that you don't know about. We need to get ahead of this." She explained the legal process, the timelines involved, and the importance of documenting everything before Marcus realized I knew about his plans. "The most important thing right now is information," she said. We need to know exactly what assets exist, where they're located, and what Marcus might be trying to hide or move. How do I get that information without him knowing? Patricia smiled, and for the first time since I'd discovered Marcus's betrayal, I felt like I might have an ally who was smarter than my opponents. Leave that to me, but I'm going to need your help with some of the legwork. Are you prepared for this to get complicated? I thought about Sophia and Grace, about the college funds Marcus was planning to steal, about the home we'd built that he wanted to take away from us. I'm prepared for whatever it takes. That afternoon, I picked up the girls from school as usual, and tried to act normal while my mind raced with everything Patricia had told me. She'd given me homework: make copies of all our financial documents, start documenting Marcus's schedule and behavior, and most importantly, don't let on that anything had changed. The hardest part was facing Marcus that evening. He came home late, claiming he'd been working on a big project proposal, but I could smell Jasmine's perfume on his shirt when he kissed me. The casual way he lied, the ease with which he deceived me, made me realize that this had probably been going on much longer than I'd imagined. "How was your day?" he asked, settling into his chair at the dinner table. "Fine," I replied, serving him the pasta I'd made while silently calculating how many more meals I'd have to pretend everything was normal. The usual hospital chaos. Grace launched into a story about her friend's birthday party planning, and Sophia complained about her English teacher assigning too much reading. Marcus listened and responded appropriately, playing the role of devoted father while planning to abandon us for his secretary. The contradiction was staggering. After the girls went to bed, Marcus announced he had more work to do, and disappeared into his office again. I waited until I heard him on a phone call, then quietly made my way to our bedroom and opened his dresser drawer. Hidden under his socks, I found a second cell phone I'd never seen before. My hands shook as I powered it on. The phone was full of text messages between Marcus and Jasmine, intimate conversations that made my stomach churn. But worse than the romantic messages were the ones about money. Jasmine had been researching offshore accounts, tax shelters, and ways to transfer business assets that would be difficult to trace. She wasn't just Marcus's mistress, she was his accomplice. I took photos of the most damaging conversations with my own phone, then carefully returned the device to its hiding place. As I closed the drawer, I heard Marcus's footsteps in the hallway. I quickly grabbed a book from my nightstand and pretended to be reading when he entered the bedroom. "Working late again?" I asked, not looking up from my book. "Big client presentation tomorrow. You know how it is." I knew all right. I knew he was lying, just like he'd been lying for months, but now I had proof, and more importantly, I had a plan. The next morning, I drove to Patricia's office with a folder full of photographs and documents. She reviewed everything carefully, her expression growing more serious with each piece of evidence. "Victoria, this is worse than I initially thought. They're not just planning to hide assets, they're planning to steal them. Some of these financial maneuvers they're discussing could be considered fraud." My heart pounded. What does that mean for me? For the girls, it means we're not just fighting a divorce battle, we're potentially looking at criminal activity, but it also means we have leverage. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes sharp with determination. "Your husband thinks he's being clever, but he's actually creating evidence of his own wrongdoing. We're going to use that against him." She outlined a strategy that was more complex than anything I'd imagined. We weren't just going to file for divorce and hope for the best. We were going to systematically document every illegal move Marcus and Jasmine made, build an airtight case, and then strike when they least expected it. "This is going to require patience, Victoria, and it's going to require you to keep pretending everything is normal while we gather more evidence. Can you do that?" I thought about Marcus's casual lies, about Jasmine's calculating text messages, about Elena's willingness to help them steal from me and my children. "I can do whatever it takes." Over the next 2 weeks, I became a spy in my own home. I documented Marcus's schedule, photographed his hidden phone whenever I got the chance, and copied every financial document I could find. Patricia had also hired a private investigator named David Kim, a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes. David's findings were staggering. Marcus and Elena had been moving money out of Sterling Design Group into accounts that Jasmine had helped them set up. They'd taken out loans against the business without proper documentation, creating debt that would be my responsibility if we divorced. Most shocking of all, they'd been planning to declare the business bankrupt immediately after the divorce was finalized, which would leave me with nothing while they started fresh with their hidden assets. Your husband is either very smart or very stupid, David told me during one of our clandestine meetings at a coffee shop across town. Smart because this plan might have worked if you hadn't discovered it early. Stupid because he's creating a paper trail that proves intent to defraud. How much money are we talking about? David consulted his notes. Based on what I've found so far, they've moved approximately $2.3 million into accounts that would be very difficult to trace in a traditional divorce proceeding. The number hit me like a physical blow. $2.3 million, that was our life savings, the girls' college funds, our retirement money, everything we'd worked for during 15 years of marriage. Marcus was planning to steal it all and leave us with nothing, but David wasn't finished. There's something else, Victoria. Jasmine Chen isn't who she claims to be. I looked up sharply. What do you mean? Her resume, her references, her entire employment history before she started working for your husband. It's all fabricated. Jasmine Chen graduated from business school, that much is true, but she was also arrested for embezzlement at her previous job. The charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the pattern is there. My blood ran cold. You're saying she's done this before. I'm saying your husband isn't her first victim, and based on what I've uncovered, she's very good at what she does. That evening, I sat across from Marcus at dinner and watched him laugh at something Grace had said about her soccer coach. He looked so normal, so much like the man I'd married, that it was hard to believe he was capable of such calculated betrayal. But the evidence was overwhelming, and it was growing stronger every day. After the girls went to bed, Marcus made his usual excuse about having work to do and headed for his office.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
But instead of following my usual routine of cleaning up and watching television, I quietly made my way upstairs to our bedroom and pulled out the folder where I'd been keeping copies of all the evidence Patricia and David had gathered. Spread out on our bed were bank statements, photographs of text messages, financial records, and David's investigative reports. It was a roadmap of my husband's deception, a detailed plan to destroy our family for the sake of a woman who was probably planning to destroy him in turn. As I looked at the evidence, I felt something shift inside me. The grief and shock I'd been feeling since that day in Marcus's office was transforming into something else, something harder and more focused. Marcus thought I was just a naive wife who would roll over and accept whatever scraps he decided to leave me. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I picked up my phone and called Patricia. It was late, but she'd told me to contact her anytime if something important developed. Victoria, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. I'm ready to move to the next phase. Are you sure? Once we start this process, there's no going back. I looked at the photos of Marcus and Jasmine together, at the evidence of their financial crimes, at the proof that they'd been planning to steal my children's future. I'm sure. It's time to make my husband understand exactly how alive I can make him feel. The next morning, everything began to change. But Marcus had no idea that the woman he'd been lying to for months had spent the last 2 weeks building a case that would destroy not just his marriage, but his career, his freedom, and his future with the secretary who'd made him feel so alive. Patricia had warned me that the hardest part would be maintaining the pretense of normalcy while we gathered the final pieces of evidence we needed. But as I watched Marcus get dressed for work that morning, straightening his tie and checking his appearance in our bedroom mirror, I realized that pretending to love him was no longer difficult. I didn't love him anymore. What I felt now was something much more powerful and much more dangerous. Marcus Sterling thought he'd been clever planning his escape while keeping me in the dark. He thought Jasmine Chen was his path to a new life, and Elena Rodriguez was his trusted ally. They all thought I was just an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be solved with creative accounting and legal maneuvering. They were about to discover that the biggest mistake of their lives was underestimating the woman they'd decided to betray. The plan Patricia and I developed was methodical and precise. Over the next 3 weeks, I would continue my role as the unsuspecting wife while systematically documenting every aspect of Marcus's deception. David Kim had provided me with sophisticated recording equipment disguised as everyday items. A pen that could capture audio, a watch that took photographs, even a compact mirror with a hidden camera. I felt like a character in a spy novel, except the stakes were my children's future and my own survival. Marcus's routine had become predictable in its dishonesty. Every Tuesday and Thursday he claimed to have late client meetings that kept him at the office until nearly 10 at night. What he actually had were extended sessions with Jasmine in her downtown apartment, an expensive place that his secretary certainly couldn't afford on her salary. David had been watching the building and confirmed that Marcus's car was there every Tuesday and Thursday evening, parked in the guest spot that Jasmine had somehow secured for him. On the Tuesdays when Marcus was supposedly working late, I began following him myself. Patricia had advised against it, warning that emotional involvement could compromise our legal strategy, but I needed to see the extent of his betrayal with my own eyes. The first time I watched him enter Jasmine's building, carrying flowers and a bottle of wine, I felt physically sick. This wasn't just an affair of convenience or a momentary lapse in judgment. Marcus was courting this woman with the same attention and care he'd once shown me. Jasmine lived in Harborview Towers, a luxury complex with floor-to-ceiling windows and premium amenities. The kind of place where a successful architect might live, not a secretary making $45,000 a year. David had run a credit check on her and discovered that she was somehow managing rent of nearly $4,000 a month, despite her modest income. The obvious conclusion was that Marcus was subsidizing her lifestyle, using our family's money to play house with his mistress. I began taking photographs of Marcus's car in the visitor parking area, time-stamped images that would prove he was lying about his whereabouts. But more importantly, I started documenting the financial irregularities that were becoming impossible to ignore. Our joint checking account, which typically maintained a balance of around $15,000, had been systematically drained over the past 6 months. Marcus had been transferring money in increments just small enough to avoid triggering automatic alerts, but large enough to fund Jasmine's expensive lifestyle. The revelation that hurt most came when I discovered what Marcus had done with our anniversary fund. For 10 years we'd been setting aside money each month for a special trip to celebrate our 20th wedding anniversary. It was supposed to be our dream vacation to Europe, something we'd planned and saved for since the girls were small. The account that should have contained nearly $30,000 was completely empty. Marcus had transferred every penny to an account belonging to Jasmine Chen, funding her life while stealing from our shared future. Elena Rodriguez's involvement became clearer as David's investigation progressed. She wasn't just offering Marcus emotional support for his affair, she was actively helping him restructure Sterling Design Group in ways that would protect him during divorce proceedings. Elena had convinced Marcus to change the business partnership agreement, creating new clauses that would allow her to buy out his share at a significantly reduced price if he ever needed to liquidate his interest quickly. What Marcus didn't realize was that Elena was positioning herself to acquire control of the company he'd spent 8 years building. David uncovered emails between Elena and Jasmine that revealed an even more sophisticated betrayal. The two women had been in communication long before Marcus's affair with Jasmine began. Elena had actually recruited Jasmine, finding her through professional networks and specifically targeting her for Marcus. It wasn't a chance meeting or a workplace romance that had evolved naturally. It was a calculated seduction designed to destroy Marcus's marriage and leave him vulnerable to Elena's business maneuvering. The most shocking discovery came when David traced Jasmine's employment history more thoroughly. She hadn't just been fired from her previous job for embezzlement. She'd been part of a team that specialized in targeting successful married men, seducing them, and then working with accomplices to steal their assets. Elena wasn't Marcus's loyal business partner. She was Jasmine's collaborator in a sophisticated con game that had been played out multiple times before. Reading the evidence David had compiled, I realized that Marcus wasn't the master manipulator I'd initially thought. He was a victim too, albeit one whose ego and midlife crisis had made him an easy target. Jasmine had studied him carefully, learning his vulnerabilities and exploiting them with surgical precision. She'd made him feel young and desirable while systematically stealing everything he'd worked for. Elena had provided legitimacy and business expertise, helping to create legal structures that would transfer Marcus's wealth to them while leaving him with nothing. The irony was devastating. Marcus thought he was being clever by planning to leave me with minimal assets after our divorce. In reality, Elena and Jasmine were planning to leave him with nothing at all. They'd let him destroy his marriage and alienate his children, then they'd take everything and disappear, leaving him broke and alone. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, and Marcus was too blinded by his infatuation with Jasmine to see what was happening. Armed with this information, Patricia and I refined our strategy. We weren't just going to protect my interests in the divorce, we were going to save Marcus from complete destruction while ensuring that Elena and Jasmine faced consequences for their crimes. It was a delicate balance, seeking justice without letting Marcus escape accountability for his choices. The next phase of our plan required careful timing. Patricia had connections with federal investigators who specialized in financial crimes, and she'd been quietly sharing our evidence with them. The FBI was building its own case against Elena and Jasmine, but they needed more proof of intent and a clearer picture of the money trail. That's where I came in. Marcus had been keeping his second phone hidden in our bedroom, but I'd been monitoring it regularly, photographing new messages and documenting the escalating plans. Recently, the conversations had become more urgent. Elena was pressuring Marcus to accelerate the timeline for restructuring the business, claiming that market conditions made it necessary to act quickly. What she was really doing was creating a sense of urgency that would push Marcus into making legal commitments before he could think them through carefully. Jasmine's messages had become more demanding as well. She was pushing Marcus to file for divorce immediately, claiming that she couldn't continue living in secrecy. She wanted him to leave me and the girls, move in with her, and start their new life together. What she didn't tell him was that she'd already given notice at her apartment and purchased a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands, where Elena had been setting up offshore accounts. The federal investigators wanted to catch Elena and Jasmine in the act of transferring stolen funds, which meant allowing their plan to proceed far enough to constitute clear criminal activity. This created a dilemma for me. To build the strongest possible case against them, I had to let Marcus continue believing his marriage was intact while he signed away his business and prepared to abandon his family. The emotional toll was enormous. Every night I had to lie next to Marcus and pretend I didn't know he was planning to leave me. Every morning, I had to help Sophia and Grace get ready for school while knowing their father was about to destroy their family. The girls had started asking questions about why I seemed distracted, why Marcus was working so much, why there was tension in the house that they couldn't quite identify. Sophia, who'd always been the more perceptive of the twins, confronted me directly one evening while we were cooking dinner together. "Mom, are you and Dad getting divorced?" The question hit me like a physical blow, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "Why would you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because you don't talk to each other anymore. And Dad's always on his phone, even when he's home. And you look sad all the time, even when you're smiling." I set down the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables and turned to face my daughter. At 14, Sophia was already showing signs of the woman she'd become, intelligent and intuitive with a strength that reminded me of myself at that age. She deserved honesty, but I couldn't give her the whole truth without potentially compromising our legal strategy. "Dad and I are going through a difficult time," I said carefully. "But whatever happens, Grace and you are the most important things in both of our lives. We both love you more than anything, and that will never change." Sophia studied my face with the intensity she usually reserved for her most challenging homework assignments. "Is Dad seeing someone else?" The directness of the question stunned me. I'd underestimated how much the girls had observed, how clearly they could see through the facade Marcus and I had been maintaining. "What makes you think that?" I asked. "He smells different sometimes, like perfume that isn't yours. And he gets text messages that make him smile in a way that's different from when he's texting you or us." I pulled Sophia into a hug, marveling at her perceptiveness while my heart broke for what she was about to go through. "Sophia, I need you to trust me right now. I know things seem confusing and scary, but I'm handling it. I'm going to make sure you and Grace are protected, no matter what happens. Are we going to lose our house?" The practical concern in her voice made me realize that she'd been thinking about this situation much more deeply than I'd given her credit for. "No, sweetheart, whatever else happens, you're not going to lose your home or your security. I promise you that." Grace appeared in the kitchen doorway, having clearly been listening to our conversation. At 14, she was still more innocent than her twin, more willing to believe that adults had everything under control. But even she could sense that something fundamental was changing in our family. "Are we still going to Disney World this summer?" she asked, referring to the vacation we'd been planning for months. I looked at my daughters, these two beautiful young women who were about to learn that their father was capable of devastating betrayal, and made them a promise I intended to keep. "We're going to Disney World, and we're going to have the most amazing vacation ever. Because some promises are more important than anything else." That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Marcus announced that he needed to discuss something important with me. My heart pounded as I wondered if he was finally going to confess to the affair, or if he was going to ask for a divorce, or if somehow he'd discovered that I knew about his plans. But when we sat down in our living room, what he said was entirely different. "Victoria, I've been thinking about our financial future, and I believe we need to make some changes to protect our assets." The irony of his words was staggering. Marcus thought he was being subtle, setting up a conversation that would lead to him gaining more control over our finances, before filing for divorce. What he didn't know was that I'd already seen his detailed plans, already knew exactly what protecting our assets meant in his vocabulary. "What kind of changes?" I asked, trying to sound naturally curious rather than suspicious. Marcus pulled out a folder containing legal documents that looked official and intimidating. "Elena has been advising me on some business restructuring that would have tax advantages for us. It would involve transferring some of our personal assets into business accounts, which would give us more flexibility and better protection if either of us ever faced any kind of legal liability." I recognized the documents immediately. David had found similar paperwork in Elena's office, templates for transferring personal wealth into business structures that could then be manipulated or hidden during divorce proceedings. Marcus was asking me to voluntarily sign away my rights to our marital assets, making his theft legal and my future destitution official. "This seems complicated," I said, flipping through the papers. "Shouldn't we have our own attorney review this before we sign anything?" Marcus's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Elena is an attorney, Victoria. She's been handling business law for 8 years. We don't need to pay someone else to tell us what she's already explained." "But Elena is your business partner. Shouldn't we have someone representing our interests as a family, not just the business interests?" "Elena is looking out for our family. This restructuring will benefit all of us." The way he said it, with such conviction and sincerity, made me realize how completely Jasmine and Elena had manipulated him. Marcus genuinely believed he was acting in our family's best interests, even as he prepared to abandon us. The cognitive dissonance was remarkable, but it also made me feel something unexpected. Despite everything he was planning to do to me and the girls, I felt sorry for him. "I'd like to think about this for a few days," I said, setting the documents aside. "These are big decisions, and I want to make sure I understand all the implications." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Victoria, timing is important with these things. The tax advantages Elena identified are only available if we act quickly." "How quickly?" "Ideally we'd sign these tomorrow." The pressure he was applying confirmed everything Patricia and I had suspected. Elena and Jasmine were pushing Marcus to accelerate their timeline, probably because they were getting nervous about maintaining their deception much longer. The federal investigation was making them anxious, even though they didn't know it existed yet. "Marcus, we've been married for 15 years. We've made every major financial decision together, carefully and thoughtfully. Why are you suddenly pushing me to sign legal documents without taking time to review them properly?" For a moment his mask slipped, and I saw something in his eyes that looked almost like panic. "I'm not pushing you, Victoria. I'm trying to protect our family's future. But if you can't trust me to make good decisions for us, maybe we have bigger problems than I thought." The accusation was designed to make me feel guilty for questioning him, to manipulate me into signing the documents by suggesting that my hesitation indicated a lack of faith in our marriage. It was the same kind of emotional manipulation Jasmine had been using on him, and recognizing the technique made me understand how easily good people could be turned against their own interests. "I trust you, Marcus," I lied smoothly. "I just want to be responsible. Give me until the weekend to read through everything, and then we can sign whatever you think is best." The relief on his face was obvious. He thought he'd successfully convinced me that his powers of persuasion had overcome my natural caution. What he'd actually done was give me the time I needed to coordinate with Patricia and the federal investigators for the trap we were about to spring. The next morning I delivered copies of Marcus's documents to Patricia, who immediately recognized them as slightly modified versions of forms that had been used in previous cases involving Elena and Jasmine. The federal investigation had identified a pattern of similar financial manipulations in Portland, Seattle, and Denver, all involving the same basic strategy of seducing married men and convincing them to restructure their assets in ways that facilitated theft. "Victoria, this is the break we've been waiting for," Patricia told me during our meeting that afternoon. "Marcus asking you to sign these documents establishes clear intent to defraud. When you refuse to sign them, it's going to force Elena and Jasmine to reveal their backup plans." "What kind of backup plans?" "Based on what we've seen in other cases, they'll probably try to convince Marcus to forge your signature, or to claim that you've become mentally unstable and unable to make financial decisions. Either approach will constitute additional crimes that the FBI can use to build their case." The federal agents Patricia had been working with wanted to meet with me directly. Agent Sarah Chen, an expert in financial crimes, who'd been tracking Elena and Jasmine's activities across multiple states, explained that they were close to having enough evidence to make arrests, but they needed to document the final stages of the conspiracy. "Mrs. Sterling, I want you to understand that what you're doing is incredibly brave and incredibly important," Agent Chen told me. "Women like Elena Rodriguez and Jasmine Chen destroy families and ruin lives. They've stolen millions of dollars from their victims, and they've left a trail of broken marriages and devastated children in their wake. How many other families have they done this to?" "At least 12 that we can document, probably more. The pattern is always the same. Elena identifies a successful married man with substantial assets, then Jasmine moves in to seduce him. They work together to manipulate the victim into compromising his marriage and restructuring his finances, then they disappear with everything." Agent Chen showed me photographs of other families Elena and Jasmine had destroyed. Successful men who'd lost their businesses, their homes, and their children. Women who'd been left penniless and emotionally shattered. Children who'd watched their fathers choose strangers over their own families, only to lose everything anyway when the con artists moved on to their next victims. "The difference in your case," Agent Chen continued, "is that you discovered the conspiracy before they could complete it. Most of their victims don't realize what's happening until it's too late to recover their losses or rebuild their lives." Looking at those photographs, I felt a cold determination settle in my chest. Elena and Jasmine weren't just threatening my family, they were professional predators who'd been destroying lives for years. Stopping them wasn't just about protecting Sophia and Grace. It was about preventing them from victimizing other families in the future. The plan Agent Chen outlined was complex but straightforward. I would continue to delay signing Marcus's documents while wearing recording equipment that would capture his increasingly desperate attempts to persuade me. The federal agents would be monitoring Elena and Jasmine's communications, waiting for them to reveal their intentions to forge documents or take other illegal actions. "The key is patience, Mrs. Sterling. They're going to escalate their pressure on your husband, and he's going to escalate his pressure on you. Eventually they'll cross a line that gives us clear evidence of criminal intent. How long will this take? Based on their previous patterns, probably no more than 2 weeks. They can't maintain this level of deception indefinitely, and they know it. When they start feeling trapped, they'll make mistakes." That evening, I went home to my family and continued the charade of normalcy that had become my daily performance. Marcus was on edge, clearly stressed about my failure to sign the financial documents immediately. He kept checking his phone obsessively, and I could see him composing carefully worded text messages that I knew were going to Elena and Jasmine. The girls were doing homework at the kitchen table while I prepared dinner, their presence a constant reminder of what was at stake in this elaborate game of deception. Sophia looked up from her algebra textbook and caught me watching Marcus pace nervously around the living room. "Mom, is Dad okay? He seems really stressed about something." "He's dealing with some business complications, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." But Grace, who'd been listening while pretending to focus on her science project, glanced up with concern. "Is our family going to be okay?" The innocent trust in her voice almost broke my resolve. My daughters had no idea that their father was planning to abandon them, that his secretary was plotting to steal their college funds, that their entire world was balanced on the edge of destruction. But they could sense the tension, the undercurrent of anxiety that had infected our home over the past few weeks. Our family is going to be fine, I told them with absolute certainty. Better than fine, we're going to be stronger and happier than we've ever been. Marcus paused his pacing and looked at me sharply, clearly wondering what I meant by that statement. But I just smiled and continued stirring the sauce for dinner, letting him interpret my words however his guilty conscience suggested. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Marcus tried a different approach to pressuring me about the financial documents. Instead of discussing business advantages, he tried to make it about trust and partnership in our marriage. Victoria, I've been thinking about our conversation last night, and I realize I might have seemed pushy about the financial restructuring. That wasn't my intention. I looked up from the book I was pretending to read, giving him my full attention. The thing is, he continued, sitting down beside me on our bed, Elena has explained that there are time-sensitive elements to these tax advantages. If we wait too long, we'll miss the opportunity entirely. What kind of time-sensitive elements? Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me an email from Elena that looked official and urgent. It was filled with legal jargon about quarterly filing deadlines and regulatory changes that created a narrow window for the kind of restructuring Marcus was proposing. To someone without legal expertise, it would have seemed compelling and legitimate. What Marcus didn't know was that David had already shown me the template Elena used to create these fake urgency emails. She'd used similar tactics with her previous victims, creating artificial deadlines that pressured them into making hasty decisions. This does seem important, I said, studying the email. But Marcus, if we're making decisions that affect our family's entire financial future, shouldn't we at least consult with someone who represents our interests rather than just the business interests? Elena represents our interests, Victoria. She's been our friend for 8 years. But she's also your business partner. There could be conflicts of interest that we don't see. Marcus's expression hardened. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything improper. I'm just saying that major financial decisions shouldn't be rushed, even if there are deadlines involved. So you don't trust my judgment. The question was designed to make me feel guilty for questioning him, but I'd seen this manipulation tactic coming. I trust your judgment completely, Marcus. That's why I know you'll understand why I want to be careful about something this important. For a moment he looked confused, as if he couldn't figure out how to argue with my logic. Then his phone buzzed with a text message, and I watched his expression change as he read it. Based on his reaction, I suspected it was from Jasmine, probably pressuring him to resolve the situation more aggressively. Victoria, I need you to sign these documents tomorrow. The deadline Elena mentioned isn't flexible. The shift in his tone was dramatic. Gone was the patient, understanding husband trying to include me in family decisions. This was a demand, delivered with an authority that suggested he expected compliance without further discussion. What happens if I need more time to think about it? Then we lose the opportunity, and our family's financial security suffers because you couldn't trust me to make good decisions for us. The emotional manipulation was becoming more obvious and more desperate. Marcus was following a script that Elena and Jasmine had probably given him, using guilt and pressure to force me into compliance. But his discomfort with the tactics was obvious, suggesting that this approach didn't come naturally to him. Marcus, you're scaring me. Why are you suddenly so insistent about something you introduced just yesterday? What's really going on? For a moment I thought he might confess everything. His face went through a series of emotions, and I could see the internal conflict between his love for our family and his infatuation with Jasmine. But then his phone buzzed again, and whatever vulnerability I'd glimpsed disappeared behind a mask of stubborn determination. What's going on is that I'm trying to protect our family's future, and you're making it unnecessarily difficult. By wanting to read legal documents before I sign them. By questioning every decision I make, by acting like you don't trust me to know what's best for our family. The accusation was so unfair, so completely divorced from reality, that I almost laughed. Marcus was planning to steal our assets, abandon our children, and destroy our marriage, but somehow I was the one who didn't trust him. I do trust you, Marcus. But I also have a responsibility to our daughters to make sure I understand what I'm signing. Surely you can appreciate that." He stood up abruptly, his frustration obvious. "Fine, take another day to read the documents. But Victoria, I need your answer by Friday, and I need it to be yes. This opportunity won't wait for your decision-making process." Friday was 3 days away. According to Agent Chen's timeline, that was probably when Elena and Jasmine would move to their backup plan, either forging my signature or taking some other illegal action that would give the FBI the evidence they needed to make arrests. As Marcus left our bedroom to make what I knew would be a phone call to Jasmine, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. After weeks of playing the role of the unsuspecting wife, I was finally approaching the moment when I could stop pretending and start fighting back. The next 2 days passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated tension. Marcus became increasingly agitated as Friday approached, making frequent phone calls that he thought I couldn't hear, and sending text messages with the urgency of someone whose entire world was about to collapse. Elena called me directly on Thursday evening, something she'd never done before. Her tone was friendly and concerned, but I could hear the underlying desperation. "Victoria, Marcus mentioned that you have some concerns about the financial restructuring documents. I thought maybe we could talk woman to woman, and I could help put your mind at ease." The recording equipment Agent Chen had given me was sophisticated enough to capture phone conversations, so I knew this call would become evidence in the federal case. I tried to sound naturally confused rather than suspicious. "I appreciate that, Elena. I guess I'm just wondering why this has to happen so quickly. Marcus says there are deadlines, but major financial decisions usually take more time to consider. The regulatory environment for business taxation is changing rapidly right now, Victoria. The advantages we can secure for your family by acting this week won't be available next week." It was the same artificial urgency that Elena had used with her previous victims, but hearing it directed at me made it sound even more transparently manipulative. "Could you help me understand what specific regulations are changing?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear Elena calculating how much detail to provide without revealing that her deadline was completely fabricated. "It's quite technical, Victoria. Tax law isn't really something that makes sense unless you have legal training. That's why Marcus and I handle these kinds of decisions for the business. But this isn't just a business decision, is it? These documents would affect our personal assets too." Another pause, "only in ways that would benefit your family. Victoria, I've been Marcus's partner for 8 years. Do you really think I would advise him to do something that wasn't in your best interests?" The question was designed to make me feel guilty for doubting her, but all it did was remind me of the evidence David had collected showing Elena's plan to steal Marcus's share of their business while leaving him financially destroyed. "Of course not, Elena. I'm just trying to be responsible. I understand, but responsibility sometimes means trusting the people who have the expertise to make complex decisions. Marcus trusts me to guide him in business matters. Perhaps you could trust both of us to make the right choice for your family." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. Elena was treating me like a child who couldn't understand grown-up decisions, someone whose concerns were irrelevant because I lacked the intelligence to grasp complex financial matters. "I'll definitely consider everything you've said, Elena. Thank you for taking the time to call. Of course, and Victoria, I hope you'll make the right decision for everyone involved." The thinly veiled threat in her final statement was the kind of slip that Agent Chen had been waiting for. Elena was beginning to show her true nature, revealing the calculating predator beneath the friendly business partner facade. Friday morning arrived with an atmosphere of barely contained tension. Marcus was up early, pacing around the kitchen while I made breakfast for the girls. He kept checking his phone and glancing at me with an expression that mixed desperation with barely controlled anger. Sophia and Grace picked up on the tension immediately. They ate their breakfast quickly and quietly, clearly wanting to escape whatever confrontation they sensed was building between their parents. After the girls left for school, Marcus sat down across from me at our kitchen table and pulled out the financial documents for what he clearly intended to be our final discussion. "Victoria, today is the deadline. I need you to sign these papers now." I looked at the documents, then at my husband's face, and realized that this was the moment when everything would change. In a few minutes, Marcus would discover that his compliant wife was actually a woman who'd been systematically documenting his crimes for weeks. Elena and Jasmine would learn that their carefully planned conspiracy had been exposed from the beginning, and the federal agents who'd been building their case would finally have enough evidence to destroy a network of predators who'd been destroying families for years. "Marcus," I said quietly, "I'm not going to sign those documents." The words hung in the air between us like a physical barrier. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally anger. He set the documents down on the table with deliberate precision, as if he was trying to control his temper through careful movements. "What do you mean you're not going to sign them?" His voice was dangerously quiet. I folded my hands in my lap, marveling at how calm I felt despite the gravity of the moment. "I mean exactly what I said, Marcus. I'm not going to sign documents that would transfer our family's assets into business structures that I don't understand and that benefit people other than our children." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Victoria, we've been over this. Elena has explained everything. These documents protect our family's financial future. Elena has explained what she wants me to believe. But I've done my own research, and I've discovered some very interesting things about the financial restructuring you're so eager for me to approve." For the first time since this conversation began, Marcus looked genuinely worried. "What kind of research?" I reached into the kitchen drawer where I'd been keeping copies of the most damaging evidence and pulled out a manila folder. Marcus's eyes widened as he recognized bank statements, copies of text messages, and photographs that he'd thought were safely hidden. "I know about Jasmine, Marcus. I know about the apartment you're paying for, the credit cards you've been using to fund her lifestyle, and the money you've been transferring from our accounts to hers." Marcus's face had gone completely white. He reached for the folder, but I pulled it back. "I also know about Elena's real role in your financial restructuring plan. Did you know that she's done this before? That she and Jasmine have been working together to target married men like you, seducing them and then stealing their assets?" "That's impossible," Marcus whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? When did you first meet Jasmine, Marcus? Who recommended her for the job as your secretary? And when did Elena first suggest that you needed to restructure your business assets?" I watched the realization dawn on his face as he connected the timeline. Elena had recommended Jasmine for the position 8 months ago, claiming she was the daughter of a business associate who needed a fresh start. The financial restructuring conversations had begun shortly after Jasmine started working for him, initially presented as general business optimization, but gradually becoming more focused on protecting assets from potential divorce proceedings. "You're wrong," he said, but there was no strength in his denial. I opened the folder and pulled out copies of the text messages between Jasmine and Elena that David had obtained through the federal investigation. "These are conversations between your girlfriend and your business partner, Marcus. They're discussing how to transfer your assets to offshore accounts and how to time your divorce filing to maximize their profits." Marcus grabbed the papers with shaking hands, reading messages that revealed the true nature of his relationships with the 2 women he'd trusted most. His face crumpled as he absorbed the evidence of their betrayal, the casual way they discussed manipulating him, and disposing of him once they'd taken everything he owned. "This can't be real," he said, but his voice was breaking. "It's completely real, and Marcus, it gets worse. Jasmine isn't who she claims to be. Her employment history, her references, her entire background is fabricated. She's a professional con artist who's done this to at least 12 other men in the past 5 years. I pulled out the photographs Agent Chen had shown me, images of other families that Elena and Jasmine had destroyed. These are their previous victims. Successful men who thought they'd found young women who made them feel alive again. Men who lost their businesses, their homes, their children, and their futures because they believed lies that were carefully crafted to exploit their vulnerabilities." Marcus stared at the photographs, his hands trembling as he recognized the pattern of destruction that he'd been heading toward. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because despite everything you've done, despite the lies and the betrayal, and the plans to abandon our family, I don't want to see you completely destroyed. Sophia and Grace need their father, even if he's been making terrible decisions." Marcus set the photographs down and looked at me with something approaching desperation. Victoria, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Jasmine made me feel alive again. Yes, I heard that conversation. The pain in my voice was real, even though I'd had weeks to process his betrayal. The question now is what you're gonna do about it. Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Jasmine's name, and I could see him calculating whether to answer it or not. Answer it, I said, but put it on speaker. Marcus hesitated, then accepted the call and activated the speaker function. Jasmine's voice filled our kitchen, sweet and concerned in a way that would have seemed loving if I hadn't read her messages plotting to destroy my husband's life. Marcus, darling, did Victoria sign the documents? Elena is getting nervous about the timeline. Marcus looked at me with pleading eyes, clearly hoping I would somehow rescue him from having to confess the truth to his accomplices. But I just smiled and gestured for him to respond. Jasmine, there's been a complication. What kind of complication? Marcus, we've been planning this for months. Everything depends on those signatures being finalized today. Victoria has discovered some information about our relationship, and about the financial arrangements. There was a long pause. When Jasmine spoke again, her voice had lost its sweet tone and taken on a sharp edge that revealed her true nature. What exactly has she discovered? Marcus looked at me again, clearly out of his depth in a situation that required the kind of deception he wasn't capable of. I took pity on him and leaned toward the phone. Hello, Jasmine, this is Victoria. I've discovered everything. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm not sure what you think you know, Mrs. Sterling, but Marcus and I are in love. We're planning a future together. I know about Portland, Jasmine, and Seattle and Denver. I know about Robert Chen and the widower who died under suspicious circumstances. I know about the offshore accounts and the fake documents and the plan to disappear to the Cayman Islands once you've stolen everything Marcus owns. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear Jasmine's mind racing as she tried to figure out how much I actually knew and how she could salvage the situation. You're delusional, Mrs. Sterling. Marcus, you need to get your wife some professional help. She's clearly having some kind of breakdown. It was exactly the response Agent Chen had predicted. When cornered, Elena and Jasmine's standard strategy was to claim their victims' wives were mentally unstable, setting up a narrative that would justify forging signatures or taking other illegal actions. Actually, Jasmine, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. Clear enough to have been working with federal investigators who are very interested in your activities. This time the pause was so long I thought the call might have been disconnected. When Jasmine spoke again, her voice was completely different, cold and calculating without any pretense of sweetness. What do you want? I want you to understand that your little game is over. The FBI has been building a case against you and Elena for weeks, and they have more than enough evidence to send you both to prison for a very long time. You're bluffing. Am I? Agent Sarah Chen from the Financial Crimes Division has been monitoring your communications for the past month. She knows about the forged documents, the stolen identities, the money laundering and the conspiracy to commit fraud. She also knows about your travel arrangements to the Cayman Islands and the accounts you've been setting up there. The sound of Jasmine's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone speaker. Marcus was staring at me with a mixture of shock and growing comprehension as he realized the scope of what had been happening around him. Marcus, Jasmine said, her voice taking on a pleading tone, don't listen to her. We can still make this work. We can leave today, right now. I have everything arranged. Marcus looked at the evidence spread across our kitchen table, then at me, then at the phone where his lover was trying to convince him to abandon his children and flee the country with her. Jasmine, he said quietly, is it true? Are you and Elena planning to steal my business? Marcus, sweetheart, you're confused. Victoria is manipulating you with fake documents. Elena and I would never hurt you. I pulled out my phone and opened the audio file of the conversation Agent Chen had recorded between Jasmine and Elena discussing their exit strategy. Jasmine's voice came through clearly, casual and cold as she discussed how easy it would be to transfer Marcus's assets and disappear, leaving him broken while they started new lives with his money. Marcus listened to his lover's real voice discussing his destruction with the same tone she might use to plan a grocery list. When the recording ended, he looked like a man who'd been physically beaten. Why? He asked, his voice barely audible. Jasmine was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, there was no pretense left, no artificial sweetness or manufactured affection. Because you made it easy, Marcus. You were so desperate to feel young and desired that you never questioned anything. Men like you always think you're so smart, so successful, so irresistible. But you're just marks waiting to be played. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This was the woman Marcus had been willing to abandon his family for the person he'd thought made him feel alive again. She'd never cared about him at all. He'd been nothing more than a paycheck to her. Marcus ended the call without another word, his hands shaking as he set the phone down on the table. He sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the evidence of his own manipulation and the casual way his conspirators had discussed destroying him. "What happens now?" he finally asked. "Now you're going to call Elena and tell her that I've refused to sign the documents and that you need to discuss alternative arrangements. You're going to wear a recording device and you're going to let her incriminate herself by explaining what the backup plan is." Marcus looked up sharply. "You want me to help you build a case against Elena? I want you to help the FBI build a case against Elena and Jasmine. They're criminals, Marcus. They've destroyed other families, stolen millions of dollars, and ruined lives. Your cooperation could prevent them from victimizing other people. And what happens to me?" It was a fair question. Marcus had been a victim of manipulation, but he'd also made choices that had nearly destroyed our family. He'd been willing to steal from our children's college funds and abandon his wife to pursue a fantasy that was never real. That depends on what you do next. If you help the FBI complete their investigation and take responsibility for the damage you've caused to our family, we might be able to rebuild something from this mess. If you continue to protect Elena and Jasmine, or if you try to minimize your own accountability, then you'll face the consequences alone. Marcus studied my face, clearly trying to determine if I was offering genuine forgiveness or setting another trap. "What about our marriage?" "I don't know, Marcus. What you've done has broken something fundamental between us. The trust, the partnership, the sense that we were building a life together. I don't know if that can be repaired, but there's a possibility." I thought about Sophia and Grace, about the family we'd been before Elena and Jasmine had entered our lives, about the man Marcus had been, when he was thinking clearly rather than being manipulated by professional predators. "But it would require you to be completely honest about everything, to take full responsibility for your choices, and to spend a very long time proving that you're committed to being the husband and father we need you to be." Marcus nodded slowly, acceptance and determination replacing the confusion that had clouded his thinking for months. "What do I need to do?" An hour later, Agent Chen arrived at our house with the recording equipment and legal documents that would make Marcus an official cooperating witness in the federal investigation. She explained that Elena and Jasmine were probably panicking, knowing that their timeline had been disrupted and that their careful plans were falling apart. "Sterling," Agent Chen said, "I want you to know that your husband's cooperation could be the key to preventing these women from disappearing and starting over with new identities in another location. We've been tracking them for 2 years, but they're very good at what they do." Marcus looked pale, but determined as Agent Chen attached the recording device and explained what he needed to accomplish during his conversation with Elena. The goal was to get her to admit that she and Jasmine had been planning to steal his assets, and to document whatever backup plan they intended to implement, now that I'd refused to sign the legal documents. "Elena is smart and cautious," Agent Chen warned. "She's not going to confess to anything directly. You'll need to make her believe that you're still on her side, that you're looking for ways to proceed without Victoria's cooperation." Marcus practiced his approach several times, role-playing with Agent Chen until he could sound convincingly frustrated with me while maintaining his cover as a willing participant in Elena's scheme. It was painful to watch him rehearse lies that weren't very different from the ones he'd been telling me for months, but I understood the necessity. When Marcus called Elena, I listened from the kitchen while Agent Chen monitored the conversation from our living room. Elena's voice was tense as she answered, clearly expecting bad news about my refusal to sign the documents. "Marcus, what happened with Victoria?" "Jasmine said there were complications. She won't sign, Elena. She's suspicious about the timing and the legal implications. I think someone might have given her advice about protecting her interests in case of divorce." There was a pause. "What kind of advice?" She's asking questions about why the documents need to be signed immediately, about what happens to her rights if she transfers assets into business accounts. She might have consulted with an attorney. Damn it, Marcus, we needed those signatures today. The accounts are already set up, and the transfer window closes Monday morning. The admission was exactly what Agent Chen had been hoping for. Elena had just confirmed that she'd been moving money according to a predetermined timeline, which established premeditation and intent to defraud. Is there another way to proceed? Marcus asked, following the script Agent Chen had given him. There might be. How important is Victoria's cooperation to you, Marcus? I mean in the long term. The question was clearly designed to determine whether Marcus would be willing to proceed with forged signatures or other illegal alternatives to my voluntary cooperation. What do you mean? I mean once the business restructuring is complete, you and Jasmine will have the financial security to start your new life together. Victoria's approval won't matter anymore, but the documents require her signature. Documents can be adjusted, especially if we have evidence that Victoria's decision-making has been compromised by emotional instability or outside influence. Agent Chen was nodding approvingly from the living room. Elena was suggesting document forgery and potentially identity theft, federal crimes that would add years to her eventual sentence. I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting, Elena. I'm suggesting that there are legal precedents for proceeding with necessary business decisions when one party is being unreasonable or acting against the family's best interests. Jasmine has been researching options. What kind of options? The kind that don't require Victoria's cooperation. Marcus, you've been the primary decision-maker for your family's finances for 15 years. A good attorney could argue that Victoria's sudden reluctance to trust your judgment indicates that she's not capable of making rational financial decisions. The sophistication of Elena's manipulation was remarkable. She was suggesting a legal strategy that would paint me as mentally incompetent while positioning Marcus as the responsible party trying to protect our family's assets. It was probably the same approach she'd used with previous victims, creating justifications for stealing from wives who'd been painted as obstacles to their family's financial security. But wouldn't that require medical evidence or psychological evaluation? Elena laughed, a sound that was cold and calculating. Marcus, you're thinking like an honest person. There are ways to create the documentation we need, especially when we have Jasmine's expertise in document preparation. Agent Chen was making notes rapidly, documenting Elena's admission that she was prepared to create fraudulent medical or legal documents to support their theft. The conversation was providing everything the FBI needed to file federal charges. Elena, this is getting complicated. Are you sure this is the right approach? Marcus, I need you to focus on what's important here. You love Jasmine, and she loves you. You want to build a life together, and you deserve to be happy after 15 years of marriage to a woman who clearly doesn't appreciate you. But happiness requires financial security, and financial security requires making some difficult decisions. The emotional manipulation was seamless, reminding Marcus of his grievances against me while framing document forgery as a romantic gesture rather than a federal crime. Elena was a master at making illegal activities seem like reasonable solutions to personal problems. What would I need to do? Just bring the documents to my office this afternoon. Jasmine and I will handle the technical aspects, and by Monday morning, your financial restructuring will be complete. After that, you'll be free to live the life you want. And Victoria will be provided for according to the legal agreements, but she won't have the power to interfere with your business decisions anymore. Think of it as protecting your family's future from someone who's not thinking clearly. Agent Chen was signaling for Marcus to end the conversation before Elena became suspicious about his questions. Marcus wrapped up the call by agreeing to meet with Elena that afternoon, giving the FBI time to set up surveillance equipment in her office. After Marcus hung up, Agent Chen reviewed the recording with obvious satisfaction. Mrs. Sterling, this conversation provides everything we need to arrest Elena Rodriguez for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Combined with what we already have on Jasmine Chen, we can file federal charges that will put both of them in prison for at least 15 years. The relief I felt was overwhelming. For weeks I'd been carrying the burden of knowing that my family was under attack while maintaining the pretense that everything was normal. Now finally, Elena and Jasmine would face consequences for their crimes, and other families would be protected from their predatory schemes. What happens to Marcus? Agent Chen looked at my husband with a mixture of sympathy and professional assessment. Mr. Sterling's cooperation will be taken into account during any legal proceedings. He was clearly a victim of manipulation, but he also made choices that facilitated the conspiracy. How the courts handle his situation will depend partly on the extent of his cooperation and partly on the specific charges filed. Marcus looked like a man who'd aged years in a single morning. The confident, successful architect who'd walked into our kitchen that morning had been replaced by someone who understood how close he'd come to losing everything that mattered in his life. "I want to help however I can," he said quietly. "These women need to be stopped." The afternoon arrest operation was swift and efficient. Elena was taken into custody at her office while attempting to forge my signature on the financial documents. Jasmine was arrested at the airport, where she'd been preparing to board a flight to Miami, with connections to the Cayman Islands. Both women were charged with multiple federal crimes, and their carefully constructed conspiracy collapsed within hours. The most shocking discovery came when federal agents searched Elena's office and found detailed files on dozens of potential victims, including psychological profiles and financial assessments that read like hunting guides for predators. Elena and Jasmine hadn't just been stealing from their current victims, they'd been building a database of future targets that could have supported years of additional crimes.
Marcus spent the rest of the day being debriefed by federal agents, providing details about his interactions with Elena and Jasmine that would help prosecutors build their cases. Watching him recount the lies he'd been told and the manipulation he'd endured was painful, but it was also necessary for his own healing process. When he finally came home that evening, Sophia and Grace were waiting with the questions I'd been dreading. The arrest of their father's business partner had made the local news, and their friends had been texting them all afternoon asking if their family was involved in the federal investigation. "Mom, Dad, what's going on?" Sophia asked as soon as Marcus walked through the door. "Everyone's saying Elena was arrested for stealing money." Grace looked between Marcus and me with the confused expression of someone trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces. "Does this have something to do with why you guys have been acting weird lately?" Marcus sat down heavily in his chair, looking at his daughters with an expression of profound regret. "Girls, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be difficult to hear." For the next hour, Marcus explained as much as he could about Elena and Jasmine's deception without going into details that would be inappropriate for 14-year-olds to hear. He told them about the business fraud, about the fake romance designed to manipulate him, and about the plan to steal our family's assets. What he didn't tell them, and what I agreed should wait until they were older, was the extent of his willing participation in the conspiracy and his plans to abandon our family for a woman who'd never cared about him at all. Sophia, predictably, was the first to ask the hard questions. "Dad, does this mean you were going to leave us?" Marcus's face crumpled, and for a moment I thought he might not be able to answer. "Sophia, I was confused and manipulated by people who were very good at making me believe things that weren't true. But no matter what mistakes I made, I would never have abandoned you and Grace. You're the most important things in my life." It wasn't entirely truthful, but it was as much truth as they needed to hear right now. Grace seemed satisfied with the explanation, but Sophia studied her father's face with the intensity that meant she was filing away information for future consideration. "Are we going to be okay?" Grace asked, the practical concern that had become her default response to family stress. I reached over and took her hand. "We're going to be better than okay, sweetheart. The people who were trying to hurt our family are going to prison, and we're going to rebuild everything stronger than it was before." "What about Dad's business?" It was a good question. Sterling Design Group would survive Elena's arrest, but it would require significant restructuring and probably months of legal proceedings to sort out which assets belonged to the business and which had been illegally transferred to accounts controlled by Elena and Jasmine. "The business will be fine," Marcus said, though I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "It might take some time to recover from the damage Elena caused, but we have good clients and solid projects in development." After the girls went to bed, Marcus and I sat in our living room and tried to process the magnitude of what had happened to our family.
In the space of a single day, we'd gone from a marriage built on lies and deception to something that might eventually become honest communication and genuine partnership. "Victoria," Marcus said after a long silence, "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. What I did to our family, the choices I made, the lies I told, it's all unforgivable." I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation and self-justification that had characterized his behavior for months. Instead, I saw genuine remorse and something that looked like the man I'd fallen in love with 17 years ago. "You're right, Marcus, it is unforgivable, but that doesn't mean it can't be overcome. What's the difference? Forgiveness would mean pretending that what you did didn't matter, that it didn't damage our family and break our trust. Overcoming it means acknowledging the full extent of the damage and then doing the hard work necessary to rebuild something better." Marcus nodded slowly. What would that work look like? It was a question I'd been thinking about for weeks, ever since I'd first discovered his betrayal. The easy answer would have been divorce, taking half of everything, and starting over with the girls. But watching Marcus realize how completely he'd been manipulated, seeing his genuine horror at the extent of Elena and Jasmine's deception, had made me reconsider what justice and healing actually required. It would start with complete honesty about everything that happened. No minimizing, no self-justification, no blaming Elena and Jasmine for choices you made willingly. And then it would require years of proving that you're committed to being the husband and father we need you to be. Years of rebuilding trust through consistent actions rather than words. Marcus was quiet for a long time, considering the magnitude of what I was describing, and there's no guarantee that it would work. No guarantee at all. The damage you've done to our marriage might be irreparable. But for the sake of Sophia and Grace, and for the sake of the life we built together before Elena and Jasmine poisoned it, I'm willing to try if you are. "I am," he said immediately. "Victoria, I'm willing to do whatever it takes." The federal trial of Elena Rodriguez and Jasmine Chen began 6 months later. Marcus testified as a cooperating witness, describing in detail how they'd manipulated him and outlining their plans to steal our family's assets. His testimony was crucial to the prosecution's case, providing an insider's perspective on their sophisticated conspiracy. Elena and Jasmine's defense strategy was predictable but ultimately unsuccessful. They claimed that Marcus had been a willing participant in all their schemes, that he'd pursued Jasmine romantically despite knowing she was using him, and that the financial manipulations had been his idea. But the evidence Agent Chen had gathered, combined with testimony from their previous victims, painted a clear picture of professional predators who'd perfected their techniques over years of destroying families. The trial also revealed the full scope of their criminal network. Elena and Jasmine had been working with accomplices in multiple states, sharing information about potential victims and coordinating their attacks to maximize profits while minimizing the risk of detection. They'd stolen more than $8 million from their victims over 5 years, leaving a trail of broken marriages and devastated children across the country. When the verdicts were announced, Elena Rodriguez was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. Jasmine Chen received 22 years for the same charges plus additional counts related to her previous victims. Both women would be middle-aged when they were eligible for parole, their prime years lost to the consequences of their predatory choices. Marcus and I attended every day of the trial, partly to support the prosecution, but mostly to help him understand the full extent of what had been done to our family. Watching Elena and Jasmine's victims testify about the damage they'd suffered was painful but necessary. Marcus needed to see the broader pattern of destruction that he'd nearly become part of, the lives that had been ruined by the same lies and manipulation that had nearly destroyed our marriage. The financial recovery process was more complex than the criminal prosecution. Elena had successfully transferred nearly $2 million from Sterling Design Group into accounts that were difficult to trace, and recovering those funds required months of forensic accounting and international legal cooperation. In the end, we recovered about 70% of what had been stolen, enough to rebuild the business and secure our family's financial future, but not enough to undo all the damage. Marcus used the experience to transform his approach to both business and family relationships. He implemented new financial controls at Sterling Design Group that would prevent future manipulation, and he began seeing a therapist who specialized in helping people recover from psychological manipulation. Most importantly, he committed to complete transparency in all his dealings with me and the girls. The changes in our family dynamics were gradual but significant. Sophia and Grace, who'd initially been confused and frightened by the federal investigation and trial, gradually came to understand that their father had been victimized but had also made choices that could have destroyed their family. They held him accountable for those choices while also supporting his efforts to make amends. Sophia, true to her perceptive nature, was the first to directly address the trust issues that continued to affect our family relationships. One evening, nearly a year after Elena and Jasmine's arrest, she sat down with Marcus and me at the kitchen table where so many crucial conversations had taken place. "Dad," she said, with the straightforward intensity that characterized her approach to difficult topics, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Marcus braced himself, clearly expecting a question about his affair or his plans to leave our family. "If someone else tries to manipulate you the way Elena and Jasmine did, how will you recognize it? How will we know that you won't make the same mistakes again?" It was a remarkably sophisticated question for a 15-year-old, but it addressed the core issue that would determine whether our family could truly heal from the damage that had been done. Marcus thought carefully before answering. "Sophia, I've learned that manipulation works by isolating people from the relationships and support systems that keep them grounded. Elena and Jasmine convinced me that my feelings were more important than my commitments, that my happiness mattered more than your security and your mother's trust. So how will you recognize it next time? By staying connected to you and your mother and Grace, by talking through major decisions instead of making them in secret, and by remembering that real love strengthens families rather than destroying them." Sophia studied his face with the same intensity she brought to her most challenging homework assignments. "And if you start feeling like someone outside our family understands you better than we do, then I'll talk to your mother about it immediately, and I'll probably also talk to my therapist about why I'm feeling disconnected from the people who matter most in my life." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest and thoughtful in a way that gave Sophia the reassurance she'd been seeking. She nodded and returned to her homework, but I could see that she'd filed the conversation away as an important data point in her ongoing assessment of whether her father could be trusted to protect their family in the future. Grace's approach to processing the trauma was different but equally important for our family's healing. She focused on practical concerns, asking detailed questions about our financial security and the steps we'd taken to prevent future theft. She wanted to understand the legal protections we'd put in place and the warning signs that might indicate someone was trying to manipulate our family again. Her questions helped me realize that both girls had been affected more deeply by the crisis than I'd initially understood. They'd learned that trusted adults could make decisions that threatened their security, that successful people could be manipulated into betraying their families, and that financial stability could disappear overnight if the wrong people gained access to family assets. Addressing their concerns required ongoing conversations about trust, security, and the importance of family loyalty in the face of outside pressure. But it also required demonstrating through consistent actions that Marcus and I were committed to protecting their interests and maintaining the stability they needed to feel safe in their own home. 2 years after Elena and Jasmine's arrest, our family had found a new equilibrium that was different from what we'd had before but stronger in many ways. Marcus had rebuilt Sterling Design Group into a more successful and secure business, implementing the lessons he'd learned about financial controls and partnership agreements. He'd also rebuilt his relationships with Sophia and Grace, earning their trust through consistent reliability rather than grand gestures. Our marriage was more complicated. The foundation of easy trust and assumed loyalty that had characterized our first 15 years together had been permanently damaged by Marcus's betrayal. But in its place, we'd built something more intentional and more honest. A partnership based on explicit commitments and ongoing communication rather than assumptions about each other's priorities. Marcus proposed that we renew our wedding vows on our 20th anniversary, a gesture that was both meaningful and slightly awkward given the circumstances that had brought us to that point. Sophia and Grace thought it was romantic, but they also insisted on writing their own contributions to the ceremony. Vows that held both parents accountable for maintaining the family stability they'd learned was more fragile than they'd previously understood. The ceremony was small, attended only by close friends who'd supported us through the crisis and family members who'd watched us rebuild our marriage from the ground up. Agent Chen attended as a guest, having become a friend during the long process of investigation and prosecution that had brought justice to Elena and Jasmine's victims. When Marcus and I exchanged our renewed vows, the promises we made were different from the idealistic commitments of young love that had characterized our original wedding. These vows were informed by experience, tempered by the knowledge of how quickly trust could be broken and how difficult it was to rebuild once damaged. Victoria, Marcus said, "I promise to choose our family every day in every decision, even when other choices seem easier or more exciting. I promise to be transparent about my feelings, my struggles and my relationships, so that you never have to wonder about my loyalty again." My own vows were equally specific. Marcus, I promise to remain vigilant about threats to our family, while also remaining open to the possibility of forgiveness and healing. I promise to hold you accountable for your choices while also supporting your efforts to be the husband and father we need you to be. Sophia and Grace added their own promises to maintain family loyalty and to speak up when they noticed behavior that seemed inconsistent with our shared values. Their contributions reminded everyone present that rebuilding our family had been a collective effort, requiring commitment from all four of us rather than just the two adults whose marriage had been threatened. As we celebrated our renewed commitment that evening, surrounded by people who'd supported us through the darkest period of our lives, I reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought us to that point. Marcus's betrayal could easily have destroyed our family permanently, leaving Sophia and Grace without the stability they needed, and leaving me to rebuild my life alone. Instead, Elena and Jasmine's criminal conspiracy had ultimately strengthened our family bonds by forcing us to confront problems we might have ignored otherwise. We'd learned to communicate more honestly about difficult topics, to support each other through genuine crises, and to appreciate the value of loyalty and commitment in a world full of people who were willing to exploit those qualities for personal gain. The financial recovery had also changed our approach to money and security. Rather than simply accumulating wealth, we'd learned to protect it through legal structures that would prevent future manipulation. We'd also learned to value experiences and relationships over material possessions, understanding that the things that truly mattered couldn't be stolen by criminals or lost through poor investment decisions. Marcus's business success continued to grow, but he approached it differently, prioritizing sustainable growth and ethical practices over rapid expansion. He'd learned that professional success meant nothing if it came at the cost of family relationships, and he structured his work life to ensure that business pressures never again created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by predators. Most importantly, we'd all learned to recognize the warning signs of manipulation and to trust our instincts when something seemed too good to be true. Elena and Jasmine had succeeded initially because they'd told Marcus what he wanted to hear, making him feel special and desirable while gradually isolating him from the relationships that might have helped him see through their deception. The girls, now in their senior year of high school, had incorporated these lessons into their own approach to relationships and decision-making. They'd learned to value consistency over excitement, to prioritize long-term commitments over immediate gratification, and to seek advice from trusted family members when facing important choices. Their college applications included essays about resilience, family loyalty, and the importance of recognizing manipulation in personal relationships. Both girls had developed a maturity beyond their years, understanding that trust was something to be earned rather than assumed, and that family bonds required constant attention and care to maintain their strength. When college acceptance letters began arriving in the spring, both Sophia and Grace had been accepted to their top choices with significant merit-based scholarships that would cover most of their educational expenses. The college funds that Elena and Jasmine had attempted to steal were still intact, supplemented by the financial recovery from the federal prosecution and Marcus's renewed success in business. Sophia chose to study criminal justice with a focus on financial crimes, inspired by her experience with Agent Chen and the federal investigation. She wanted to protect other families from predators like Elena and Jasmine, understanding from personal experience how devastating such crimes could be for innocent victims. Grace decided to pursue business administration with an emphasis on ethical leadership, motivated by her father's experience and her desire to understand how successful organizations could protect themselves from internal threats. She'd watched Marcus rebuild Sterling Design Group with stronger controls and better partnership structures, and she wanted to help other businesses avoid the vulnerabilities that had nearly destroyed our family. Both girls credited their father's experience, however painful, with helping them understand the importance of integrity in personal and professional relationships. They'd seen how easily good people could be manipulated when they allowed their emotions to override their judgment, and they'd also seen how dedication to family values could help people recover from even devastating mistakes. Marcus's relationship with Elena's replacement as business partner had developed slowly and carefully, with extensive legal protections and transparency requirements that would prevent future manipulation. Sarah Williams was a respected architect with impeccable references and a long history of ethical business practices, but Marcus insisted on maintaining safeguards that would protect both the business and our family from any potential threats. The new partnership agreement included provisions for regular financial audits, shared decision-making authority, and automatic dissolution clauses that would protect both partners if either one's judgment became compromised. Marcus had learned that trust without verification was simply naivety, and that successful partnerships required structures that protected everyone involved from their own potential weaknesses. Sterling Design Group's reputation had actually improved following the federal investigation. Clients appreciated Marcus's transparency about what had happened and his proactive approach to preventing future problems. The business grew steadily, attracting new clients who valued integrity and reliability over flashy marketing or aggressive pricing strategies. Marcus also used his experience to become an advocate for other victims of financial manipulation. He worked with federal investigators to identify warning signs of similar conspiracies, and he spoke at business conferences about the importance of protecting organizations from internal threats. His willingness to share his story, despite the personal embarrassment involved, helped other business owners recognize vulnerabilities in their own operations. The most unexpected development was Marcus's friendship with Robert Chen, one of Elena and Jasmine's previous victims who'd lost his business and marriage to their conspiracy. Robert had attended the federal trial and reached out to Marcus afterward, recognizing a fellow survivor who understood the complex emotions involved in being manipulated by professional predators. Their friendship helped both men process the shame and anger that lingered long after the criminal prosecution had ended. They'd both made choices that had endangered their families, but they'd also been targeted by sophisticated criminals who'd spent years perfecting their techniques. Understanding the distinction between personal accountability and victimization was crucial for their ongoing healing process. Robert's experience had been more devastating than Marcus's, because his wife had divorced him before the truth about Elena and Jasmine emerged. He'd lost his children, his business and his marriage, and he was still struggling to rebuild his life years after the conspiracy had been exposed. His situation served as a constant reminder to Marcus of how much worse our family's outcome could have been. Through their friendship, Marcus developed a deeper appreciation for the forgiveness I'd offered and the commitment our daughters had shown to rebuilding our family relationships. He understood that his path to redemption had been made possible by the people who'd chosen to support him despite his mistakes, and he never took that support for granted. As the 5-year anniversary of Elena and Jasmine's arrest approached, our family had achieved a stability that was different from what we'd had before but stronger in important ways. We'd learned to value honesty over harmony, to prioritize long-term security over short-term comfort, and to maintain vigilance about threats to our relationships without becoming paranoid or suspicious. Marcus and I had developed new traditions that reinforced our commitment to transparency and mutual support. We had weekly conversations about our individual challenges and concerns, monthly reviews of our family's financial situation, and annual assessments of our relationship goals and priorities. These practices might have seemed overly structured to couples who'd never experienced betrayal, but they provided the foundation of trust and communication that we needed to feel secure in our renewed partnership. The girls, now preparing for their sophomore year of college, had maintained close relationships with both parents while developing their own independence and confidence. They'd learned to navigate adult relationships with wisdom beyond their years, understanding the importance of choosing partners and friends who shared their values and respected their family commitments. Sophia's work with the university's criminal justice program had led to an internship with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, where she worked directly with Agent Chen on cases similar to the one that had affected our family. Her first-hand experience with victimization gave her unique insights into the emotional impact of financial crimes, and her academic training provided her with the analytical skills needed to build strong cases against perpetrators.
Grace's business studies had focused on organizational behavior and ethics, with particular attention to the psychological factors that made successful people vulnerable to manipulation. She'd written her senior thesis on corporate fraud prevention, using Marcus's experience as a case study in how external threats could exploit internal vulnerabilities in otherwise successful organizations. Both girls had become advocates for family loyalty and ethical decision-making in their peer groups, sharing their father's story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing personal gratification over family commitments. Their friends often sought their advice about relationship problems or difficult decisions, recognizing that they'd developed wisdom through experience that their peers had been fortunate enough to avoid. The financial impact of Elena and Jasmine's conspiracy had ultimately been manageable, thanks to the federal prosecution's asset recovery efforts and Marcus's ability to rebuild his business successfully. But the emotional and psychological impact had been transformative for our entire family, teaching us lessons about trust, forgiveness, and resilience that would influence our decisions for the rest of our lives. Looking back on the experience 5 years later, I could honestly say that our family had emerged stronger from the crisis, despite the pain and uncertainty we'd endured during the investigation and recovery process. We'd learned to appreciate the value of honest communication, mutual support, and shared commitment to values that were more important than individual desires or ambitions. Marcus had become a different kind of husband and father, more intentional about his choices and more aware of his responsibilities to our family. The confident, somewhat arrogant man who'd been vulnerable to manipulation had been replaced by someone who understood the importance of humility, accountability, and continuous effort in maintaining strong relationships. The girls had developed resilience and wisdom that would serve them well throughout their adult lives. Understanding from personal experience that good people could make bad choices, but that families could survive and thrive even after devastating betrayals, if everyone was committed to the hard work of healing and rebuilding. As for me, I discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed, and learned that love sometimes required fighting for the people who mattered most, even when they'd made choices that caused tremendous pain. The experience had tested every aspect of my character and my values, but it had ultimately confirmed my belief that families were worth fighting for, and that justice was possible even in the face of sophisticated criminal conspiracies. Elena Rodriguez and Jasmine Chen remained in federal prison, their careers as professional predators permanently ended by their convictions. Occasionally I received updates about their appeals or their conditions in prison, but they'd become footnotes in our family's story, rather than central characters. The damage they'd caused had been repaired, and the lives they'd tried to destroy had been rebuilt stronger than before. The true victory wasn't in their punishment, though justice had been important for all their victims. The real victory was in our family's survival and growth, in the relationships we'd rebuilt, and the wisdom we'd gained through surviving their attack on everything we valued. Sometimes, late at night when Marcus and I talked about our future plans or our hopes for the girls' continued success, we acknowledged how different our lives might have been if I hadn't discovered his betrayal when I did, or if we'd chosen divorce over the difficult work of rebuilding our marriage. The path we'd taken hadn't been easy, but it had led us to a place of genuine strength and security that would have been impossible without experiencing and overcoming the crisis together. Our story had become one of redemption rather than destruction, of family loyalty triumphing over criminal manipulation, and of love proving stronger than the forces that had tried to tear us apart. It wasn't the fairy tale ending we might have preferred, but it was real and honest and earned through the choices we'd made when everything that mattered was at stake. Marcus often said that Elena and Jasmine had actually done our family a favor by forcing us to confront problems we might have ignored until it was too late to address them effectively. Their conspiracy had revealed vulnerabilities in our marriage and our communication that needed to be strengthened, and their manipulation had taught us all valuable lessons about recognizing and resisting future threats to our relationships. In the end, the woman who'd made Marcus feel alive again had actually made him feel broke instead, exactly as I'd promised that morning when everything changed. But more importantly, she'd made our entire family stronger, more honest, and more committed to the values that really mattered. That outcome, achieved through justice rather than revenge, was worth far more than any satisfaction I might have gained from simply destroying the people who'd tried to destroy us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.